Thank you, Alexa. Very briefly. Most of you have heard and followed the presentation from the three speakers. I think what we heard from the Commission, the formal setup on the recovery, on the planning. Then, of course, we heard from Raphael. At this stage, even though Commissioner's early stage, the crucial lack of transparency and involvement, despite all the benefits of early involvement and creating ownership of the plans, what is missing. And then as well, I think you know, and you got an idea of how all EU funding plays into the transition, which we have to get going faster. So again, a little bit of a very personal assessment. The Commission left me, at least, alone with a sobering understanding that everything is in the plans. If we can't see the plans, this is nothing the Commission are actually able to do about. So is the case for all the questions of sustainability, of coherence of the plans, how it relates the EU plans to the national move. So I got the impression that we are now thrown back to ourselves in a way. And I think from this point of view, it is very good that we now hear the following case studies, really, again, to have a deeper look into where, how the transition is possible, and then definitely as well learn from the good practices from those regions who are really engaging in the transition, who are got going in putting the plans and the funding out for the recovery, for the just transition, and as well for cohesion policy programming. So I would just leave it like that, and I'm looking forward to a set of exciting case studies to learn the good and the bad. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Good morning also from my side. My name is Jörg Mühlenhoff. I'm working as Energy Scenarios Coordinator at CAN Europe, together with Markus and some other CAN Europe colleagues. So my task is a bit to build the bridge from the recovery topic that you all are most interested in. And I will guide you a bit through the economic effects that this economy might have. Of course, even before the pandemic, it was evident, and the new von der Leyen Commission in 2019 committed to it, we have to increase our ambition. The Paris Agreement clearly states that we need to make sure that we keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. And in order to do so, the EU, of course, as you all know, pursues its own climate target. And the current one is pretty outdated. It dates back from the time even before the Paris Agreement was agreed on in 2015. It's the 40% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030. And now the Commission suggested 55%. Next week, there is a European Council discussing the proposals to potentially agree on a new 2030 target, but we as NGOs, CAN Europe clearly says this is not enough. We have to reach 65% greenhouse gas emission reduction by the year 2030 with the EU in order to be on a trajectory to reach net zero emissions by 2040 already, and to really be compatible and aligned with the Paris Agreement. We all already today experience what it means, the dangerous climate change. It is really a threat to our wealth. And we know from economists very clearly that the faster, the quicker we start acting, the less expensive it will be, the more we can reduce the costs of dangerous climate change. You know, all the floodings, the droughts, the problems that agriculture faces, the health problems that also have a cost. So how can we reach this level of ambition, the 65% greenhouse gas emission reduction, this increase that we definitely need by the year 2030? We as Can Europe, together with the European Environmental Bureau, EB, almost 2 years ago, we started to develop our own scenario. It's the Paris Agreement compatible energy scenario, the PAC scenario. Some of you in the room have already been involved in this kind of grassroots scenario building process during the last 1.5 or 2 years, where we defined together with all our members, the collective expertise of our network, what are the key assumptions for transforming transport, buildings, industries, the power sector, heating and so on, to really reach the 65% and net zero emissions by 2040. Well, it is very clear how to increase the ambition. It goes, for example, through circular economy approach in the industry, a deep renovation wave in the building sector, and electrify wherever you can in the transport sector, modal shift, public transport. That is what we need. And all this will not happen without really multiplying the capacities of renewable energy, mainly solar, PV, and wind, our domestic and cheapest European energy sources that we currently have. Together, of course, with energy efficiency measures, we can still tap a lot of energy savings potentials in Europe. This is the pathway that we suggested. I won't dig into the details, but I will present what it means, this kind of investment plan. You can read it as a kind of investment plan, our PAC scenario. What it means also for the recovery. You can already see and estimate a bit, you can forecast what could be the economic benefit, what could be the costs for our economies in Europe. So honestly, we do not yet have a very detailed country-specific result for every country in the PAC scenario. We did not yet run a fully fledged macroeconomic analysis, but we cooperated with a number of independent scientists and researchers in order to estimate the macroeconomic effects, the different benefits of this pathway towards 65%. And I will guide you through a number of studies now that have calculated, partly with our numbers or with comparable numbers and assumptions, whether it will pay off or not. But first of all, a very maybe systematic methodological overview of what are these economic effects of ramping up renewables, and most of these effects also apply to energy efficiency. On the top, on the right, in this nice tree of benefits, you have the yellowish fruits that are very obvious. The macroeconomic effects: when you invest in more renewables, you will harvest more jobs, employment effects. You will also have an impact on economic growth, on the gross domestic product, GDP. You will have to pay less for importing oil and fossil gas from other countries abroad. There are also indirect effects on the right, on the bottom, the system effects, the blue fruits, which are linked to investing in renewables and energy efficiency. Namely, of course, you cut the damage, you avoid, you prevent the damage that would have occurred with more and more emissions. There is also a portfolio effect, which relates to the fact that it is less risky to use renewables, while with fossil gas, fossil oil, you have to hedge it. It's a global market with volatile prices. There is speculation and so on, while with renewables as domestic resources, we know the prices, it's transparent and it's quite stable. That is also an economic benefit. And you can also make the big picture and compare how much does it cost for an entire society to keep the houses warm, to keep the lights on, and how does it interlink? How does it interact with other branches of our economies? On the left side, there are also distribution effects, and not all of the fruits here on this tree, they are not necessarily all sweet for everyone. There are impacts on electricity markets due to the fact that renewable electricity, wind and solar, does not have any fuel costs. Yeah, I mean, you cannot privatize the sun and the wind. But when it comes to the allocation of the costs of the investments and so on, it depends. There might be consumers who will have to pay more, or other groups, other consumers who benefit more, which is important for the big picture. There are other important, interesting effects that also relate to the recovery, of course, the regional value creation, the locally added value that is much stronger with renewables. When you invest in your local small wind farm or solar panels, of course, this is imported. Mostly the solar panels now, they come from Far East, but it's local companies who install it. It's local companies who make the benefits. And they pay local taxes, regional taxes, and they employ, of course, mostly local staff. So there is a multitude of economic benefits, and I will show now a few more studies that looked into what happens when you take out the water can, when you pour water on this tree of economic benefits. There is, first of all, a study we closely work together with these colleagues from German Institute for Economic Research. The emission cuts of 65% by 2030 would save us 280 billion euros of import costs for the fossil fuels that we get from the Middle East, the oil, or from Russia, all the fossil gas that we import. It, of course, will increase by 2040 in case we really pursue this net zero emissions pathway that we suggest in the PAC scenario. When it comes to the avoided environmental costs, of course, this is also huge with the assumption that 1 ton of CO2 leads to external costs of roughly 180 euro. This will allow us to save environmental damage, all the costs related to droughts, to floodings, and so on, of roughly 10 trillion of euros. As an indirect effect, of course, there is the benefit for health. Cutting emissions only by 55%, this is what the Commission suggests and what the European Commission also evaluated in an impact assessment just some weeks ago. This would lead to cutting 2/3 of the air pollutants. And you know that the air pollutants, of course, they cause health costs and they cause premature deaths. So increasing the level of ambition of climate action also means that we just save lives. Roughly 120,000 Europeans would not have to die earlier than needed, according to this analysis of the European Commission, thanks to reducing air pollutants. So when you make up the big picture, when you compare really 55% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030, how much does it cost in terms of investments, in terms of fuel costs, in terms of all the employment and so on, all the changes that also affect other economic sectors? There we have a very interesting result that recently has been published by colleagues from think tank Climate. They say that all in all, the higher ambition of 65% leads to a quarter less total energy system costs than the less ambitious 55% target. So it's roughly 24% less expensive for the entire society to pursue a more ambitious 65% target. When it comes then to the effects on innovation and energy markets, as we are already talking about prices, once you really start mass production, what already has happened with most renewable energy technologies in Europe, they are very compatible. There are still learning curves. They still can continue to reduce their costs. You end up also with massive savings that also can translate into clear cuts in consumers' bills. And it has a very important impact also on electricity markets. You see here the price falling for the levelized cost of electricity generation from renewables on average. Once you go towards a 1% renewable energy system by 2040 already, as we also suggest in our PAC scenario. Okay, so what about the jobs? That's maybe the most interesting thing, and unfortunately there are not very clear studies. The International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, did a comparison, but they only took into account the current policies, and they assume that jobs would double in Europe from renewables alone, from 1.5 million to 2.7 million. But this probably will be much more. These are very conservative and a bit outdated numbers, maybe. On top of that, besides the pure renewable jobs, there are also jobs related to the energy transition, like in energy infrastructure related to this energy transition, and also energy efficiency, the savings. Think about all the craftsmen and women that work in the deep renovation wave, that refurbish our buildings. That's an enormous, huge motor of jobs. The consultancy McKinsey just a few days ago released a report that looks into the 55% target of the European Commission. McKinsey is not known for being really environmentalist or a radical left-leaning think tank, you know, but they also clearly say that there is a huge net benefit in terms of employment. So the net job gains for the entire economy will be at least 2.2 million by the year 2030 already, and much more, 5 million by 2050. This is already taking into account the losses that we will see, for example, in the coal industries and other sectors. Of course, there are also losers, but all in all, it is a very huge, clear win-win situation. It's a beneficial process, this energy transition, and even with a rather shy 55% target. What about the CE countries now? Will they benefit from it? All these positive, these fruits from the tree that we described, it looks a bit like they are not really eager to harvest those fruits. You know about the NECPs, the National Energy and Climate Plans, that every member state had to send to Brussels to describe the ambition, the pathway of each country. The government sent it to Brussels, and colleagues from Amber, from the think tank, Amber, they looked into those numbers, and it is very evident that Central Eastern European countries, they are not really ambitious. There is barely anything happening with regards to investments into the cheapest domestic energy sources, solar and wind. Also, when you look into the share in total in 2030, what will be achieved, the red dot. Look on the right, those red dots for Czech Republic and for Slovakia, also for Hungary. It barely changes. It barely means that it's like going with a school class to learn swimming. You stand in front of the swimming pool, and then 2, 3, 4 pupils say, no, we don't go into the water. We are in this class for learning swimming, but we don't go in the water. That will not work. And this is even more astonishing when you look into the massive potential, the abundant potential of renewables that is available in Central and Eastern European countries. These are figures from LUT University, a model that we partly took over in our PAC scenario. I mean, you have much more space and much easier and cheaper available renewables in those countries compared to, example, for Germany or the Benelux countries. So there is also an interest in exporting renewables. When you look into many scenarios and studies, these countries in the future, in the 2030s, 40s, in a renewable energy system in Europe, they would supply the heavy industries in Benelux, in north of Germany, with renewable electricity and hydrogen maybe. So there is another potential that needs to be taken into account. It is also, of course, a huge chance and for the coal regions in transition in those Central and Eastern European countries. I recommend reading a study that has been published at the beginning of this year by the Commission's own Joint Research Center about the job perspectives of those regions. It's quite important, although this study is again very shy. They only take into account the outdated old renewables target. So you can assume that there are even much more than those 10,000s of jobs in solar and wind and bioenergy in Poland, and to a minor extent in the other Central European countries. So to wrap it up, there is a huge potential, and there is one thing that, however, needs to be excluded, and we need to be clear about the fact that fossil gas cannot be part of this transition. It cannot be part of the recovery, because fossil gas only increases the costs and the emissions also in the CEE countries. There is a lot of talk about switching from coal, electricity from coal, to electricity from fossil gas. that's a no-go. That's a bridge into nowhere, because you can see already today the fossil gas-fired power plants in those countries, they do not run on full capacity. They might be needed, of course, for a few years. And we do not say to switch them off from one day to another, but you need to take into account that they are just not economically viable in the future. When you see that the load factor, the utility rate, the usage rate of those power plants, the full load hours per year, they are so low. Only 4 days out of 10, those power plants would run on full steam. And that's not enough to amortize, to refinance those projects. And this is only a very conservative estimation from Bloomberg New Finance. In the PAC scenario, we also ran an analysis of the full load hours, the load factor of those fossil gas power plants in Central Eastern European countries. It's even lower. You barely don't need them anymore. It's stranded assets, and the power plant operators who burn fossil gas now, they will ask for subsidies to help them in a few years from now if we continue, if we take our targets for serious. That is for sure. Same applies for gas in the heating sector. There is a huge potential to switch to electric heat pumps. We suggest that in the PAC scenario. A few weeks ago, another analysis from European Commission's Joint Research Center has been published that shows that in almost all countries in Central and Eastern Europe, there is already a clear advantage in terms of emission reductions from heat pumps. Even if those heat pumps run with electricity that is mostly fossil electricity. I mean, of course, in Poland, there is still a difference. There's a gap. There, heating with fossil gas boilers is still a bit better in terms of heating with heat pumps, with all the coal electricity. But this will soon change, like in all the other countries that have already made this switch. And that's why you should not invest in fossil gas boilers, but directly go towards renewables, electric heat pumps. It also pays off for consumers because in every country already in 2015, heating with heat pumps was already cheaper than heating with fossil gas. So it's also a question of energy poverty and making sure that the transition pays off for everyone. So my 16 minutes are more than over. Thanks for this. Basically, our message is that it is feasible to switch to 65% with 100% renewables and energy savings that make everything much cheaper also for us as consumers and for our entire economies. It's a big boost for a true green recovery that we need. Thanks a lot.
Dzień dobry. Good afternoon. Good morning. Do you hear me? Okay. Dzień dobry. Poproszono mnie, żebym przedstawił to, co robimy w Wielkopolsce Wschodniej i w jaki sposób staramy się sprostać oczekiwaniom Komisji Europejskiej co do planów transformacji. Ja tylko dzisiaj chciałbym, żebyście Państwo zrozumieli, w jakim obszarze funkcjonujemy w Polsce, jeżeli chodzi o kwestie węgla, czy odchodzenia od węgla, czy odchodzenia od górnictwa, to powiem tylko, że dzisiaj w Polsce jest 4 grudnia, jest tak zwana Barburka. To jest święto, które jest obchodzone przez właściwie cały kraj. W każdej stacji radiowej dzisiaj Państwo usłyszycie o ciężkiej pracy górnika, bez względu na to, czy to jest rządowa stacja, czy to jest prywatna stacja. Dzisiaj wszyscy świętują Barburkę. Górnicy stali się właściwie taką formacją zawodową w Polsce, która jest uznawana za wyjątkową przez ostatnie kilkadziesiąt lat i to nadal funkcjonuje. Także to też jak gdyby pokazuje, jak trudno pewne elementy w Wielkopolsce, czy w ogóle w całej Polsce dotyczące odchodzenia od węgla, zaprzestania wydobywania węgla, jak bardzo trudno przebijają się do świadomości społecznej. Chcielibyśmy powiedzieć, że Wielkopolska Wschodnia to jest teren, który jest częścią Wielkopolski i od 1945 roku odbywa się tam wydobywanie węgla brunatnego. Doszliśmy do takiego momentu, w którym właściwie powoli ten węgiel się kończy. Właściwie od lat 90. było wiadomo, że trzeba będzie odchodzić od węgla i starać się stworzyć coś nowego, jakąś alternatywę, ale tak naprawdę nikt się tym nie zajmował, dlatego że właśnie myślenie o górnictwie w Polsce jest w kategoriach narodowych, a nie w kategoriach ekonomicznych. I stąd właściwie wydobywano ten węgiel i spalano go w elektrowniach na węgiel brunatny, bo tak było przez ostatnie lata i tak uznawano, że jest wygodny. My postanowiliśmy opracować plan sprawiedliwej transformacji i od 3 lat uczestniczymy w tym procesie jako samorząd województwa, ale przede wszystkim jako szeroka część społeczeństwa interesariuszy, lokalnych samorządowców, NGO-sów, także związków zawodowych, w taki sposób, żeby to, co wypracujemy, to, co ma być realizowane, było częścią jak gdyby większej wspólnoty i żeby miało także akceptację społeczną. W naszym założeniu dotyczącym sprawiedliwej transformacji przyjęliśmy założenie, które jest związane z tym, że odchodzimy od węgla i zamykamy wszystkie kopalnie do 2030 roku. To jest związane z głównym udziałowcem, firmą prywatną ZEPAK, która funkcjonuje na terenie Wielkopolski Wschodniej, która jest właścicielem i kopalni, i elektrowni. I tenże pracodawca, ta firma podjęła decyzję o zielonej transformacji. Postanowiła, że do 2030 roku zamknie wszystkie swoje kopalnie, przestanie spalać węgiel. Przypuszczamy, że to zamykanie kopalń będzie nawet postępowało szybciej i może to nastąpić nawet do 2025-2026 roku, dlatego że to, co było we wcześniejszej prezentacji, spalanie węgla jest bardzo nieefektywne, jeżeli chodzi o kwestię produkcji energii elektrycznej i w tej chwili już jest kompletnie nieopłacalne. W tym sensie mamy szczęście, że mamy prywatnego inwestora, nie jest to spółka państwowa, który podjął tego typu działania. Jednocześnie sami w naszym planie transformacji i pewnej koncepcji transformacji założyliśmy, że chcemy, żeby oprócz oczywiście odejścia od węgla w energetyce, odejść na tym obszarze Wielkopolski Wschodniej także od węgla w ciepłownictwie i chcemy tutaj wesprzeć lokalne samorządy, które przeważnie są właścicielami ciepłowni, żeby także do 2030 roku się przekształciły. Drugie założenie naszej koncepcji sprawiedliwej transformacji to jest 2040 rok, który chcemy osiągnąć na tym terenie, mówię nie w całej Wielkopolsce, żeby to było jasne, ale na terenie Wielkopolski Wschodniej chcemy osiągnąć neutralność klimatyczną. Dlaczego stawiamy sobie tak ambitny cel, kiedy Polska nawet nie chce przyjąć 2050 roku? Ano dlatego, że uważamy, że jeżeli w tej chwili prowadzimy transformację regionu, to powinniśmy generalnie transformować się nie tylko w takim znaczeniu, że zastąpimy jedne miejsca pracy nowymi miejscami pracy bez względu na to, co się stanie, czyli utracone w górnictwie zostaną zastąpione czymkolwiek. Chcemy połączyć to przede wszystkim z tym, co Europa w tej chwili proceduje, czyli kwestią Zielonego Ładu i tego, żeby docelowo przechodzić od razu, zmieniając Wielkopolskę Wschodnią, właśnie na pozycje zielone. Wyznaczyliśmy sobie taką pewną wizję rozwoju Wielkopolski Wschodniej, która jest oparta na kilku filarach zmiany, czyli chcemy pozostać jak gdyby regionem, który jest związany z energetyką, ale chcemy, żeby ta energetyka była, ta energia elektryczna była pozyskiwana ze źródeł zupełnie innych, czyli przede wszystkim ze źródeł solarnych i wiatrowych. To jest jak gdyby jeden element, który dla nas jest niezwykle ważny. Kolejnym elementem, który chcemy wprowadzić, to jest kwestia pewnego pozyskania inwestorów i wytworzenia pewnego przemysłu przyszłości, czyli z jednej strony w elektromobilności, na przykład w produkcji baterii elektrycznych czy budowy zakładów, które będą się tym zajmowały, zresztą jeden już w Koninie w tej chwili powstaje, ale także wykorzystywać te wszystkie elementy, które są związane na przykład z produkcją części do wiatraków, z produkcją pewnych elementów związanych z solarnymi technologiami w taki sposób, żeby wykorzystać swoją szansę. Trzecim takim filarem, który chcemy wprowadzić, który ma być jak gdyby wyjściem na przyszłość, to są technologie wodorowe i inwestycja w wodór jako taki. Już dzisiaj zespół elektrowni Pontów Adamów-Konin inwestuje w elektrolizer, który w przyszłym roku zacznie produkować zielony wodór. Jednocześnie mamy cały plan transportowy dotyczący zmiany transportu wysokoemisyjnego na zeroemisyjny oparty o wodór, czyli część transportu będzie wodorowego, dlatego że teren jest dosyć rozległy i autobusy wodorowe, które zresztą są niedaleko Poznania produkowane, jedne z lepszych w Europie. Chcielibyśmy, żeby ten transport właśnie wchodził do Wielkopolski Wschodniej i jednocześnie chcemy jak gdyby, zaczęliśmy to w ogóle 3 lata temu mówić o wodorze, więc jesteśmy tutaj jakby w Polsce trochę prekursorami i inwestor, czyli zespół elektrowni Pontów Adamów-Konin postanowił, że wejdzie w to, że będzie jak gdyby się rozwijał w tym kierunku. Także oczywiście powstaną także farmy fotowoltaiczne i tak dalej, i tak dalej. To jest jak gdyby 2 podstawowe założenia, które w tej chwili mamy. Koncepcja zakłada bardzo szerokie wykorzystanie funduszy europejskich w tym podejściu. Uważamy, że jeżeli ktoś sobie wyobraża, że przeprowadzi transformację tylko dzięki Funduszowi Sprawiedliwej Transformacji, to się głęboko myli. Jeżeli nie podejdziemy do problemu bardzo kompleksowo i nie wykorzystamy wszystkich możliwych środków, które będą możliwe w następnej perspektywie i w kolejnych perspektywach na to, żeby przeprowadzić transformację, łącząc w różnych elementach różnego rodzaju środki krajowe, regionalne, ale także sięgając po środki, które przecież w swojej gestii ma Bruksela, czyli czy program LIFE, Horyzont, czy inne programy, czy programy, które jeszcze będą miały szerszą bazę. Tylko takie podejście może zapewnić nam sukces, który w 2040 roku traktujemy to trochę tak, marszałek województwa wielkopolskiego, pan Marek Woźniak powiedział, że traktujemy to jak Wielkopolskę Wschodnią jako pewne laboratorium dla całego regionu Wielkopolski, który jest jednym z wiodących w kraju, jeżeli chodzi o PKB czy wytwórstwo. Jesteśmy bardzo takim regionem, który bardzo dużo wnosi do kraju. I chcemy to traktować bardzo kompleksowo, przechodząc jak gdyby w te obszary, wykorzystując już dzisiaj, myśląc o tym, że nie tylko jedna perspektywa, czyli ta najbliższa, ale 2 następne mogą nam zapewnić sukces. Jesteśmy w momencie, w którym kończymy, mamy koncepcję zbudowaną, to jest dokument, który ma 100 kilkadziesiąt stron. On wyznacza jak gdyby to, co będziemy robili przez najbliższe lata do 2040 roku. Jest bardzo szeroki. Natomiast w tej chwili kończymy i myślę, że do końca roku albo pierwszej dekady stycznia będziemy mieli gotowy plan transformacji. Jesteśmy w stałym kontakcie z Komisją Europejską i z ministerstwami i to będzie nasz terytorialny plan sprawiedliwej transformacji dotyczący Funduszu Sprawiedliwej Transformacji. Natomiast dalej zamierzamy pracować, żeby z tej koncepcji i planu stworzyć strategię na najbliższe 20 lat, taką pełną strategię, która pozwoli nam planowo się rozwijać. Z drugiej strony zakładamy także, że plan transformacji i strategia muszą być bardzo elastyczne. To znaczy, my tak naprawdę nie wiemy, co się stanie w ciągu najbliższych 10-20 lat. Nie mamy zupełnie wyobraźni. Ja czasami, już się czasami śmieją ze mnie, ale czasami daję przykład, jeżeli bym zapytał Państwa, co robiliście w 1990 roku, czyli raptem 30 lat temu, oraz jak sobie wyobrażaliście przyszłość, to większość z Państwa, gdyby się cofnęła w tamtym czasie, do tamtego czasu, nie wyobrażałaby sobie, że powstaną setki i miliony miejsc pracy, na przykład w dziedzinach informatycznych, czy rozwinieją się samochody elektryczne, czy zaczniemy mówić o tym, jak wygląda w ogóle świat, że ten świat, który sobie wyobrażaliśmy 30 lat temu, zupełnie się zmienił i stworzył nowe, gigantyczne możliwości, które dzisiaj rozwijamy. I tak naprawdę my nie wiemy, co będzie za 5, 10, 15 lat. Dlatego plany, które będziemy tworzyli, muszą być elastyczne. Musimy reagować na bieżąco. Jesteśmy małym regionem i możemy generalnie pewne elementy zmienić. Ale główny kierunek, czyli ten 2040 jako zeroemisyjność, jest tutaj absolutnie priorytetowy dla nas i chcemy to osiągnąć. Powołaliśmy w tym celu grupy robocze, które w Wielkopolsce pracują. Pandemia trochę pewne rzeczy pokrzyżowała, ale grupy robocze składające się z bardzo różnych interesariuszy, czyli z jednej strony samorządowców, z drugiej strony z NGO-sów, tak samo bardzo często związanych z zielonych albo osób, które są związane mocno z ekologią, czy z kolejnej strony to są związki zawodowe górnicy, którzy tak naprawdę będą odczuwali najbardziej skutki tych przemian, ale także rolnicy, także bardzo duża rzesza osób. Pracuje tam prawie 200 osób w tych grupach roboczych i one jak gdyby wyznaczyły pewne najważniejsze wyzwania, które stoją przed Wielkopolską Wschodnią. Ta koncepcja, plan jest właśnie oparty o pracę tych ludzi i pracę, które zostały w regionie opracowane. Oczywiście do tego są eksperci, do tego są osoby, które z nami współpracują, ale chcemy, żeby plany terytorialne wychodziły od mieszkańców, żeby nie były tylko i wyłącznie napisane przez ekspertów. I to bardzo nam dużo daje w pracy z grupami roboczymi, dlatego że pojawiają się punkty widzenia, których my jako samorządowcy często nie bralibyśmy pod uwagę. To daje nam ogromną możliwość zmiany pewnych kierunków działania, zmiany i zmieniania akcentów, jeżeli chodzi o kwestie Wielkopolski Wschodniej, że bardzo często okazuje się, że nie najważniejsze są na przykład miejsca pracy, ale kwestie związane z jakością życia, z tym, że chcę w danym miejscu pozostać. Te wyzwania, które tutaj Państwo widzicie, pozwoliły nam na stworzenie takich trzech, jak gdyby, po pierwsze wizji Wielkopolski Wschodniej. Jak Państwo widzicie, ta wizja pokazuje, kim chcemy być. Bo wydaje mi się, że jednym z najważniejszych problemów, który bardzo często nie jest brany pod uwagę, jest to, o czym powinniśmy bardzo jasno sobie powiedzieć, Na początku powiedziałem o tym, co dzisiaj się dzieje w Polsce, czyli o tym, że wszystkie stacje, wszyscy mówią o górnikach. I przez kilkadziesiąt lat ci ludzie czuli się ważną częścią społeczeństwa i czuli się osobami, które coś znaczą. Tak samo jest w Wielkopolsce Wschodniej. Wielkopolska Wschodnia miała zbudowaną pewną tożsamość opartą na węglu brunatnym, na ciężkiej pracy, na tym, że to przynosiło efekty. Jeżeli my dzisiaj nie zbudujemy czegoś, co będą ci ludzie mogli przyjąć jako tożsamość, jako to, że będą się mieli z czym identyfikować, że będą ważni dla nie tylko Wielkopolski, ale Polski, że będą ważnym elementem, to wtedy, jeżeli nie uda nam się takiej tożsamości zbudować, będziemy mieli wielki problem. Dlatego, że mimo z całym szacunkiem dla ogromnych rzeczy, którą zrobiły Niemcy, ale pieniądze często nie są najważniejsze. Czasami ważniejsze jest to, że chcę tutaj zostać i tworzyć wartość dodaną. My nasz projekt nazwaliśmy Wielkopolska Dolina Energii, czyli chcemy, żeby ludzie utożsamiali się z jednej strony dalej jak gdyby w tej energii funkcjonowali poprzez to, że będzie ona produkowana ze słońca, wiatru i wodoru, a z drugiej strony, żeby wyzwolić też pewną energię społeczną, która pozwoli nam w przyszłości powiedzieć, słuchajcie, to jest wasze miejsce i warto tu pozostać, bo borykamy się właśnie z takimi problemami jak migracja, jak ucieczka młodych ludzi i tak dalej, i tak dalej. Musimy zbudować coś, do czego oni będą chcieli w perspektywie wracać. Chcemy to osiągnąć przez właściwie 3 takie osie priorytetowe, które jak gdyby określają, przenikają się między sobą, tak? One są jak gdyby pewnymi elementami zamkniętymi, ale bardzo często w tych osiach, te osie priorytetowe łączą się ze sobą w różnego rodzaju wyzwaniach. I tu macie Państwo, czyli zeroemisyjna gospodarka i gospodarka w obiegu zamkniętym jako pewna pierwsza oś, która ma podporządkowane pewne interwencje. Te interwencje mają jasno określony charakter i są już podporządkowane temu, żeby programować program w taki sposób, oczywiście jak będziemy wiedzieli, czy mamy te pieniądze i jakie mamy, żeby można było do tego sięgać bezpośrednio i oczywiście starać się zaprogramować środki na to, żeby te pewne elementy zostały pozyskane. Druga oś to jest oczywiście kwestie innowacji, nauki, gospodarki i trzecia część kwestie społeczne, czy trzecia oś to jest kwestie społeczne, które są niezwykle istotne. Każde z tych interwencji, które Państwo macie poniżej, są rozpisane na interwencje jeszcze mniejsze. Nie będę ich tutaj wszystkich przytaczał, ale chcemy, żeby zaprojektować to w taki sposób, żeby można było to łączyć. Koncepcja jest dokumentem szerszym niż sam plan. Część z tych wyzwań czy interwencji będzie można realizować w planach terytorialnych planach sprawiedliwej transformacji czy z Funduszu Sprawiedliwej Transformacji, ale część będą finansowane z innych, z Wielkopolskiego Regionalnego Programu Operacyjnego, z LIFE-a. Dostaliśmy zaproszenie i będziemy składali wniosek dotyczący właśnie zintegrowanego LIFE-a, który chcemy jak gdyby, żeby był taką forpocztą tych wszystkich działań, które będziemy robili dalej. Każda z tych osi jest rozpisana i zaprojektowana. Oczywiście poddajemy to falsyfikacji społecznej, czyli w tej chwili jak gdyby cały czas... Będę kończył już powolutku, bo chyba już przekroczyłem swój czas. W każdym razie każda oś jest także rozpisana na poszczególne interwencje bardzo dokładnie, żebyśmy wiedzieli, w którym momencie jesteśmy. Zaprojektowany został także mechanizm i uważamy, że terytorialne plany transformacji powinny być wdrażane na poziomie regionalnym. Rząd polski z tym się do końca nie zgadza, chciałby, żeby to był program krajowy. Uważamy, że regiony i subregiony, czyli nawet na poziomie NUTS 3, powinny zarządzać tymi pieniędzmi w taki sposób, żeby wykorzystać swoją szansę w najbliższych latach. Chcę także pokazać Państwu, jak wygląda u nas każdy priorytet. Na przykład priorytet 1.1 ma rozpisane, dokładnie pokazane z jednej strony Just Transition Fund, ale potem ma poszczególne programy regionalne, czy krajowe, czy unijne, pod które będzie można sięgać. I w taki sposób chcemy to zaprojektować. Także postanowiliśmy wykorzystać swoją szansę, zbudować coś, co będzie miało nie będzie działało przez najbliższe 6 lat, ale chcemy, żeby działało przez 20 lat i uważamy, że życie jednego pokolenia to jest na tyle dobry czas, żeby całą Wielkopolskę Wschodnią zmienić na neutralną klimatycznie i żebyśmy w 2040 roku mogli powiedzieć, tak to jest. No ale będzie to zależało od także wielu innych czynników, między innymi rządu, i mam nadzieję, że za 6 dni mimo wszystko i my, i Węgrzy będziemy jednak świętowali to, że jednak nasze rządy zmitygują się i podpiszą nowy budżet Unii Europejskiej, bo tym się w tej chwili najbardziej martwimy. Także dziękuję za uwagę. Jeżeli będą pytania, z chęcią odpowiem. To jest nasza prezentacja.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I would like to speak about our experience with the recovery and resilience plan in Slovakia. We have the discussions with also in the government. I was part of the discussion on webinars and meetings with around 100 experts who actually fit into a document which was called Modern and Successful Slovakia. It was something like a reform menu which was published on 5th October, and it presented measures for 25 billion euros and also other reforms, but Slovakia is available only 5.8 billion. As you can see, there are 4 elements on the right side, like fiscal reforms, green economy, research and innovation, health, education, and so on. There are like altogether 88 components. On the other hand, the discussions were quite untransparent, like it wasn't clear who was deciding about what would be added and what was the process. The experts only commented or had possibility to provide comments and give inputs, but it wasn't clear how they would be incorporated or what they would do in the future with them. And then this document, they call it analytical document from the analytical unions, the reform menu, but it's not the recovery and resilience plan. It's just a framework for it. So this was published, and also Ministry of Finance published it, but also 2 other coalition parties and at least 1 opposition party published papers on it. So it's for us a little bit unclear what to comment on. So there is not one document which would be developed. So and also ministries are preparing different papers. So it's very diverse situation. There are also events, and there would be a conference in December to do this, but it's also not very clear who is organizing it officially, and the process is not very clear. So I think it doesn't unlock the expert capacities as it could. And what we got an indication is that the Slovakia wants to finalize the recovery and resilience plan in February, to have at least 2 months to communicate back and forth with the European Commission about improvements. The green economy has components. The green economy chapter of the recovery and resilience plan has chapters which are now being negotiated. What we heard is that there is an agreement on coalition to support at least 3 or 4 components in the green economy chapter, which is green renovation of buildings. Then there is a question if they would like to support fossil gas boilers or heat pumps. They would like to solve the air pollution and energy poverty with these measures, but we are more recommending the energy efficiency first principle in here and other measures. Then there is a question of railway transport. If there would be only massive support for railways, or if there would be connecting it also with public transport and bicycle infrastructure. And then there is quite a big risk of the decarbonization of industry and alternative fuels, that big industry might give a lot of projects which might not be ambitious enough, or the polluter pays principle might not be properly addressed. And also there are risk of unsustainable hydrogen or fossil gas and so on. We are also pushing for including a component of building regional capacities for planning energy and climate projects, because Slovakia is one of the countries with the slowest spending of EU funds. And now if we have another big package, big chunk of European funding, then it's also question how to create capacities to plan and implement energy projects. Also, big discussion is if to include water adaptation measures, if the activities would be supported from gray or green infrastructure, and also circular economy, if it will be included, if the climate mainstreaming would be also widened with biodiversity and other environmental goals. There is a template from a renovation wave available. It shows how a component can look like. For example, there is a description of the component, main challenges and objectives, reforms, investments, and what it means to have it green and digital, what it means to set milestones, targets, and financing of it. So we can elaborate on it further in the breakout room. And we also organized a discussion on the renovation wave. Basically, we discussed what is the goal of the component, if to decrease greenhouse gas emissions or kilowatt hours, like energy consumption, or also if to address the frequency of use of the renovated buildings, if they are, for example, municipal buildings which are not used so regularly, and how to support, for example, natural materials, local economy, and so on. And there is also a need for regional sustainable energy capacities to ensure long-term planning and project preparation. And we also discuss how to go above the A0 energy class, or what should actually the public funding support as something additional, something which is not actually requested by the legislation. And the big question mark is also what is achievable by 2023-2026, and what goes to the multi-annual financial framework, the cohesion fund, and the European Regional Development Fund, and so on, and what goes into the recovery and resilience facility. So thank you for your attention. Maybe a small appetizer for what we would like to discuss on the breakout room. Just maybe we will divide into two aspects, the participation, transparency, and democratic inclusion, and the sustainable reforms and solutions, but not only these bullet points, but something also what other people feel that is important in their countries. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, I will introduce myself in the meantime. I'm Jana from Center for Transport and Energy in Prague. My presentation will actually look at the programming in Czechia from also mostly the participation point of view. Next slide, please. I would like to first show a couple of examples of theory of participation. Next slide. Everybody says that the decision should be not made about us, without us. We hear that the experience shows that the projects are more efficient, that when there is a kind of ownership, people generally, citizens feel better about it. That was also reiterated by the Commissioner for Cohesion when she had the hearing in European Parliament. Next slide, please. There was also organized a big conference in February this year about the citizens' engagement. Next slide, please. And last but not least, there is the European Code of Conduct, where it really nicely describes how all participation should be done. Next slide. However, the challenge is how it works in real life. Next slide. So Center for Transport and Energy, how we try to get involved is that we are the member of Zelený kruh, which is the Czech platform for ecological organizations. This platform has around 70 representatives in all various commissions, working groups, monitoring committees, preparatory platforms, etc. Needless to say, that Zelený kruh has no funding whatsoever for these activities, so all participation is voluntary. Next slide, please. How we participate in preparation of the operational program 21+. The national authority is Ministry for Regional Development. We actually wrote 4 letters about the status of the document. Once we got no answer, twice we got answer, but there was nothing about participation. And once we learned also something about participation. Next slide, please. So what we learned about the preparation of the partnership agreement is that the first public consultation took place on the 9th of December last year. So it was a true Christmas and New Year's gift, surely to every citizen of the Czech Republic. Which is also the very typical example how the timing is usually done, that it's done in the most actually impossible times. There were apparently 7 tables organized. The last one was on the 6th of December last year, but what is going on ahead at present? How was the consultation sorted out? What was really the procedure with the comments, where is any kind of evaluation of the participation? No information is actually available. The only information now was given that the allocation was improved and that once the European legislation will be approved, then the partnership agreement will be approved within 4 months and operational programs within 6 months. Next slide, please. Now I would like to give an example how is organized participation at the Ministry of Industry. At the Ministry of Industry, Zelený kruh, that I mentioned, has its member who left the organization. So we tried to replace the person. It took us actually 3 months to replace officially the person. And then it was just like a couple of days once this person was nominated, we were told that the monitoring committee will not even take place online, but it will be done per rollam. There was also several times a question how the ministry will actually transfer the people from the existing monitoring committee to the new platform that is preparing the new operational program with, unfortunately, no response. Next one, please. Then I would like to give an example of how we are trying to nominate our member to the platform that is preparing the Just Transition Fund. We communicated with the Ministry of Regional Development and the Ministry of Environment. It took 6 letters from our side, and it took 3 letters from the ministerial side, and bingo, after 3 months, we've got a representative on this platform. Next one, please. As my predecessor speaker, EUKI, talked about the way how the participation was handled in Slovakia about the resilience fund, resilience and recovery fund. It was actually in the Czech Republic the most horrifying process, because the Ministry of Industry that is in charge of preparing this document did not even go through the full procedure with all the ministries, never mind the civic actually organization. As it was already mentioned by Rafael in his previous presentation, the Czech Republic eventually was the first one that handed over the draft to the European Commission without even this draft being approved by the government. It was just acknowledged by the government. Only after very strong upheaval and really big pressure, Ministry of Industry and Trade started to organize some roundtables, which, however, again have no clear structure, no clear actually idea who can participate, who cannot, and so on. Next slide, please. The hope that I see that we might have is that CDE, again, via this platform Zelený kruh, is represented in the Government Council for NGOs. There is actually a working group that is working on the new strategy, how the government should support the civic organizations in the years 21 to 2030. The idea is finally to develop some methodology for the participation of civil society representative. That should finally, hopefully, help to diminish the monopolization of participation. And also what this working group is considering, that finally the government should start actually financially supporting the umbrella organizations such as Zelený kruh in order to make it really a more equal partnership. Next slide, please. What I would like to say, like something positive to complete my my presentation, is that CDE was one of the establishing members of the new platform in the Czech Republic called Change for the Better, which is actually consisted far more of progressive businesses than of NGOs or other stakeholders, which we actually found very hopeful and inspiring. Next slide, please. So for me, what is it really a meaningful participation? It is really about the fact that it has to be said who can participate, under what conditions, and the timing. And it is really pretty clear that discussion is a discussion. Participation is about the discussion with output, with actually data that are known from this procedure. And we know that there is a clear insufficient know-how and insufficient methodology, and that's what needs to be actually supported. Thank you.
So we continued the interesting discussion from the presentation of Mr. Sitek, and from we tried to find the challenges and the opportunities, and well, the challenges were as in the presentation as well, that even if we have the national plans, it's very obvious that just transition fund is by alone is not enough to make these nice plans happen. So the funding has to come from different places. And we discussed about like what are these jobs that need to be created, and what was especially highlighted was the importance of having jobs with dignity. So the people currently are working in these jobs that they feel are very dignified. So just a random new job is not enough. It has to be this respected and dignified, and ideally with competitive pay as well. So it's a challenge to think of these new sectors or narratives where this applies. But on the opportunity side, we see that, or what we talked about was that at least in Poland, in this region, the biggest companies that currently are working in the mining and coal business, actually they have the best position or maybe a duty to retrain, reskill the current workers with new qualifications. So like the worst case would be that these miners are now left to the open job market to find themselves a new dignified job. Actually, there's an opportunity to do it like directly from one job to the other without them being lost in the way. Again, the other opportunity was that it was discussed less in the presentation because of time, that the governance of this process has to be both governmental and also local. And even if the plans are slightly different, so the government is thinking one thing and the local level is thinking another, then the local level can still allocate some resources to their own idea. And actually the local level has the biggest strength in terms of knowledge and reputation and so on. And also we talked about what is forcing this transition, and in the end, it's very much economical. So simply because renewable energy is becoming so much more reasonable, even these very ambitious sounding dates of like 2030 can actually become 2028 or something closer. We can't know for sure, and that's why this flexibility also plays a huge role. We have to think of many different futures at the same time.
Thank you. We discussed the recovery plans in the breakout group. Basically, we wrote down challenges and opportunities. We started with the COVID situation, that there is more difficult to organize events, protests, and focuses more on the pandemic, people's health, and from participatory point of view. Also, there is a relatively short time frame to analyze plans and to do good reforms, and expectations were more ambitious than the implementation. And also there was discussion about that, for example, there is not enough ideas for reforms, but basically collecting projects, for example, in Poland, that are not probably in so systematic way linked with strategic reforms and milestones and goals. But that's my interpretation from the discussion. So please. Also there were concerns in other countries, like for example in Bulgaria, the policy landscape is quite marred with lack of continuity, transparency, lack of best practice examples, lack of awareness on ways to overcome barriers, and so on. On the positive note, we identified opportunities that in some countries there are official consultations, there might be strategic environmental assessment processes. We have a template of a component renovation wave. So if there would be other people interested in drafting shadow components or position papers, especially on the renovation wave, it might be easier when you see the structure and the categories. Also, CSOs, especially in Poland, have many ideas for reforms, know-how, and they can maybe utilize this template or feed information to the European Commission. And there are lots of people and organizations at the municipal local level who are wanting to get actively involved. So there is high motivation at the local level in terms of green recovery and improving people's lives. On the other hand, there were concerns about the national level that it's very vague or not so coordinated and precise. Then we also discussed the topical focus and the sustainable reforms and solutions. For example, the challenges were how to exclude fossil gas and waste incineration, because the fast transition from coal to fossil gas, unsustainable biomass in not energy efficient systems like district heating could be one of the biggest challenges, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. And then also that the SMEs and community projects have fewer resources to apply, lobby for support under these plans, less lobbying power in comparison to large industry projects, large transnational, multinational corporations. There are opportunities also, like, for example, applying the energy efficiency first principle, the renovation wave and deep renovation, also using energy efficiency first principle also in renewable energy sources spending. So if you get support from EU funds on heat pump, then you also have to insulate, deeply renovate the building. And also how to connect transport with other modalities. We discussed that there is also, there would be a year of railways, and in some countries railways are becoming a strong focus. On the other hand, holistically connected with public transport and cycling infrastructure is important. And also we discussed that unlocking the potential for geothermal and district heating, modern district heating solutions is very important. But please, people who have been in the group, add a few points if you would like to. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. Yeah, so we had a very interesting discussion on the programming. I'm going to start with the challenges to end up on a more positive note. On the challenges, basically, this is what we identified kind of in the presentation in mine on public participation, but also in the other very interesting presentation. Issues regarding public information and sharing of information. And this is true for the RRF, but especially for the operational program and partnership agreement. Issues regarding timelines and deadlines for consultation, because this is something that was highlighted during the working group, during the focus group, is that the focus right now is on the recovery plans. It's higher in the agenda and has priority over the programming. However, programming was delayed by the COVID, and programming is supposed to the programs of the cohesion policy basically need to be in theory available as 1st of January of 2021. So there will not be it's important that that we still have focus on that, especially on the draft and on the summaries. This is important because there is a lack of information. On the content, there is also a big problem because we know that many of the plans for the operational program are not progressive and are rather business as usual. We know that there will be an influx of gas in many countries in district heating, but also sometimes at distribution level. Also hard conditions. I mean, we have been following the trilogues and the legislative process of the cohesion policy. We know that it's very unlikely that there will be a fossil fuel exclusion in the Regional Development Fund and the Cohesion Fund. So we know that hard conditions against harmful investments will be difficult to enforce. And also this is complemented by the fact that at national level, member states might also fund some harmful activities, not under the cohesion fund, but under their own program and their own national priorities, which would clearly undermine the efforts that are done through the programming. Of course, there is also a problem of misuse of resources and embezzlement and sometimes problems of checking the real added value of investments. So this is something that is definitely a problem. But I want now to talk about opportunities, because this is not, we do not have to be that dark in our assessments. And even though there are problems also of capacities of information, for example, on procedure, when we talk about programming, we can say that there are some legal requirements and legal tools that we can use to make sure that we have a real participation and ownership. There are also obligations regarding capacity building, regarding involvement at many stages, and the Commission is sensitive to these arguments, so sometimes they can be an ally in that extent. Also on content, the focus now on the renovation wave and on energy efficiency, for example, is a good thing, and perhaps one of the few concrete examples of the European Green Deal, and also something that could be used at the policy level to push for more energy efficiency in the programming. This is also related to the most recent developments. I mean, you know that now in the Common Provision Regulation, you have the climate proofing requirements that are drastically improved. Guidance on the taxonomy are being drafted. And last but not least, there is a 30% earmarking for green investments in cohesion policy. So there are some things that can be, some arguments that can be done in order to improve the ambition of the programming. If I forgot anything, please, the ones that were in my group, please take the floor.
Thanks, Alexa. First of all, of course, thanks to you. Thanks to all the organizers, co-speakers, facilitators of today's workshop. I think it is very enlightening. I think we get a very good and deep picture and understanding of the different challenges, of the different positions, but of course as well we saw some hopeful signs as well, really some moves and some mobilizations in the direction of just transition in all its components, right? Then that we are really looking at the people who have to be taken, not forgotten, and taken on board in the transition. I think this was very much encouraging. On the other hand, of course, in a way, probably we are not surprised that that there are challenges persisting, right? This is in terms of transparency, in terms of public participation. This is as well, of course, very much the political challenge of the decision-making on the highest level, really to make bold steps, regulatory in terms of financing. And of course, as we all know, the decisive moments are now, in a way, right? I mean, this is the timeline. We are looking at the next month, maybe until the next summer next year, until we have all the plans in. I think for me personally, it was really motivating to see how many people are looking into it, all the efforts, all the knowledge that we are bringing together. And I really, I'm confident that in the next months that we are again work together, cooperate, to give input into the planning, to ensure we have the communication channels, to get involved, to have our fingerprint in the final plans and programs, and then looking forward into a next phase to ensure really the money lands there where it should be, on the ground. So this was from me. Again, thanks a lot to you, Alexa, to all the helpers, and to the participants of today's workshop.
Yes, I mean, I'm not going to be terribly original because I completely support what Marcus said. I would also like to thank everyone that that was speaking or participating to this workshop. Yes, I would just like you to if we draw some conclusions to the discussions that happened today, we can see that we have common challenges together, common challenges in the content of the plans, between the plans, and also in the process of between countries for the programming, for example, but also in the process across the different funds and the different facilities. So we have these common challenges, common opportunities. And when we see on the paper, I think the situation is good on the paper. I mean, the do no harm principle, the taxonomy, the Commission saying we will not, in theory, allow for fossil fuels in the RRP. I mean, we have a set of tools that are present. Obviously, I'm not saying that all of this is going to happen and everything is going to happen exactly as written and as the legal requirements, as the law requires. But what it means is that we need to get organized and to get, I think we have common messages to push, and also sharing information in order to make sure that we can pressure the right stakeholder and the right decision makers into accepting these tools and upholding them. Because at the end of the day, and in many cases, it boils down to a political discussion and political pressure to some extent for these legal tools to be used. And this is where we can also do something and we can have a role, and I would really emphasize that. Thank you.